following is an Ideas Agency video produced by the Media Design course at Sapporo City University's Design Department. Episode 4, brought to you by Digital Garage. It's pretty much impossible to characterize Joichi Ito in a few words. From serving as chairman of the board on Creative Commons, chairman of Six Apart Japan, board of Technorati, Digital Garage, iCommons, and the Mozilla Foundation, Joi Ito is definitely a man who wears many hats. His name has become practically synonymous with the innovation and development of internet cultures and digital systems. Be it the open source software movement and collaborative work models, the free culture movement, sharing economy theories, or even the world of warcraft and much, much more, it's undeniably difficult to find a realm where Joi Ito hasn't been involved. Born in Japan and educated in America, Joi Ito is an activist, entrepreneur, and venture capitalist, but moreover has become one of the prominent leaders of the digital age. In this interview, Joi shares his views on environmentalism, creativity, grassroots activism, and how it feeds back to the economical ecosystems.
So I think that the environment is probably the single most important issue that faces us today. But I think that the way that we've been looking at how to solve environmental issues has been kind of top-down, and it's important to have the governments get together and the G8, and that's a very important part of solving the crisis. But one thing that Dr. Kenichi Fukui, who was a Nobelist in chemistry, one of the things that he said when he was still alive, because he was very concerned about the environment even many years before we even thought about global warming. He talked about global warming. And he predicted that it would be very difficult for the governments and the corporations to stop this global warming problem because it was just going to happen so quickly. And the thing that he thought would be how we solve these environmental issues was to rely on the survival instinct of human beings. So human beings have this kind of natural instinct to change very quickly when they're under a certain amount of pressure. And I think that for me, there are many scientists who look at the data about the environment and say that we're too late. It's never going to be fixed. But the thing is, I think that most of these analysts they assume that people can't dramatically change the way they live, right? But I think that what's going to happen personally, I think that one of the most important components of fixing the environment is going to be a complete revolution in the way people think about the environment. So, for instance, if you try to calculate and say, well, if the Americans continue to use this much energy, then what do we do? Well, then you can't do anything. But if the Americans or the Japanese reduce their carbon output by 90% within the next year, then things are totally different. But I don't think that any economist could say that we would do that. But I think that people have that ability to change. And so I think that the grassroots movement for environmental change is much more important. And just to give you another example, I have recently switched to only eating vegetables, veganism, right? And for me, that was very important for my health because many of the things that I was sick with involved animal protein. But no doctors will tell you stop eating meat because they think that you can't. And many doctors will say you should cut down on cigarettes or cut down on drinking when you should just stop. And so similarly, I think a lot of the governments and the professionals are saying, well, we need to slow down on emissions. They don't say, let's stop using automobiles or let's stop, right? Because they don't think people have the will. They underestimate the human being. There's a very interesting blog called No Impact Man, and it's a science fiction writer who was running out of things to write about. So he has a family, he lives in Manhattan. He started a blog, and every day he writes about one more thing he does to lower his impact. So he stopped taking elevators, then turned off his refrigerator, and then started buying food from nearby. And every day he's lowering his impact until now he's got a family and almost using no energy. And the thing that's exciting is everybody's reading this blog, and the newspapers are picking it up, and everybody, it's become a very fun and interesting thing. So it doesn't, of course he has sacrifice, but he's showing that you can, even in Manhattan, have no impact, no energy impact or carbon impact. There's another interesting game about peak oil, and it was a game where the people, it's called an alternative reality game, and the people are told that they live in the future where they have no more oil, and you have to live with very small energy consumption. But you have to do this actually in real life. So while the game is set in the future, and they have bulletin boards where everybody's talking about the world as if it were the future, it's like a simulation, role-playing. But in real life, they have to do this. And so what everybody did was lower their carbon footprint. But what was really interesting for me was the scientists and the housewives and the local people talking about, well, this is how we lower it. Hey, by the way, did you try doing this? And it wasn't some big scientific discovery. It was everyday tricks to lower your carbon footprint. And what I think is that there are many government initiatives that might be useful, but everyday things about, well, how can you cook without using as much energy, or somebody explaining how do you filter water. And that kind of knowledge is a kind of knowledge that comes from the community, right? And what was interesting is after the game was over, most of the people actually stayed with a very low energy consumption because they realized they could do it. And so I think that this kind of awakening is very important. And I think that this is very similar to the idea of open source and the idea of sharing. Because in the past, the government would collect a tax, and then they would give the money to the Ministry of Culture, and the Ministry of Culture would distribute knowledge, and Momosho would distribute knowledge, and the Ministry of Culture would distribute art, right? But the sharing economy is, no, we will share and we will create, and the asset is part of a much more complex ecosystem instead of a planned top-down system. And I think that to try to create cultural capital, it's not about giving all of the assets and the capital to the government. Government is important, but I think most important is local government. And the local government's job is to create a platform for this kind of organic, sort of emergent energy that comes out of people who share and people who are open. And I think that one of the things that we learn from the economy, but also the ecology, is that in a complex system, it's hard to plan, right? So they started this biofuel project, but they didn't realize that the Southeast Asia people will plant these palm trees and destroy forests to make this biofuel. And it turns out that maybe the negative impact on biofuel might be huge, right? And so the world is very complex, and I think to adapt to a complex issue, whether it's cultural, economic, or social, or environment, I think right now we have to use sort of fundamental chaos theory. And the good thing is we learned a lot about it on the internet, and I think there are biologists like Kitano-san who are learning about it at the sort of biological networking level. And so there's a lot of interesting academics about it, but I think that a city is probably one of the most interesting complex systems. And anybody who has planned a city knows that things happen not because you want them to. You have to create an atmosphere. So like the most creative areas of cities, like Soho, right, was not planned. It just emerged. And I think what will be interesting is how can Sapporo become a creative city, and how do you get out of the way to allow it to happen? Because I think you don't force it. And this is something that we're learning a lot on the internet and open source. So I wrote a paper called Emergent Democracy about how social software will change the way democracy works. And I think it was a good idea, but it's still not working yet. And I think that right now we have a lot of global political issues, and so I'm working on a project called Global Voices, which is about creating information from all over the world, and Witness, which is a human rights organization that uses video. But also I think for the environmental issues, like I was saying, trying to use this networking social software to wake people up and to become more active. I think that we don't have a lot of time left and we have a lot to do. So my work, my focus right now, is to try to create the kind of tools on the internet, because that's what I understand, to enable people to have a voice and to change the world.